This is Just Something About Her, a podcast from the Recount and iHeartRadio.
We will do everything in our power to win because this is our foundational right. Without the right to vote, you don't have any other rights.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Palmieri. On this podcast, I talk to powerful women about how they made it to the top on their own terms. We're talking to Representative Gina Hinojosa and Mary González. Representative Gina Hinojosa, welcome to Just Something About Her. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here.
And I'm with you, although I'm not with you, but I am in the hotel in DC that you all have evacuated, I guess, to.
It's a refuge.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. It's pretty wild to be here. It's like a little bit exciting, but also I feel just seeing you all in person, seeing you face to face, I feel kind of the weight of what you're dealing with. How are you holding up?
I'm good. It's been a whirlwind. Our first week, we were just really pulled from meeting to meeting request. We requested these meetings and we got all of them essentially, and then media requests. And so this week, we've had now several members who have contracted COVID. And so over the weekend, we've had to reevaluate how we're doing things and really begin some pretty strict COVID protocols.
So you've been here for a week. Is that right? Tell us the story of sort of escaping Texas to DC. At what point it was decided? I know I've heard stories of people having to reschedule their weddings, packing families in car, like trying to get insulin. What was that like?
This is the second time we broke quorum within the last 6 weeks. Having done it one time for several hours reminded us of our power to do so, I think. And it was having accomplished that successfully that got us to thinking really right after that about the possibility of doing it again for the special session. We knew when we broke quorum the first time and killed the voter suppression bill that the Republicans were trying to pass, we knew that Governor would immediately call a special session to get this done. And so right away we had to think, well, what's possible? I'm not quite sure right off the bat we believed that this was possible, because we're talking about staying away from home for 4 weeks. And that's big and hard and very different from the first time we broke quorum, which was just for a few hours. So,
and remind folks when it was that you had to, break quorum, as you say. And for the uninitiated about the Texas state legislature, that means that the Democrats left the chamber so that there were not enough members in the chamber of the Texas State House in order to consider this voting legislation that would have put a lot more restrictions on voting and making it harder to. So if you, by vacating the premises and being out of the state of Texas, you prevented them from being able to pass the bill. And so Governor Abbott then, in response to that, called an emergency session after the legislative session expired. And that's what you were a refugee from right now. Have I described it right?
Yes, that's Good. Right. So in order to conduct business on the floor of the House, we need 2/3 of members present. The Democrats are a minority, so we don't have a majority to kill legislation, but we have more than 1/3 of members. So by all of us leaving, we denied Republicans the quorum they needed just to conduct business under the rules. So yes, so we're in this 30-day special session period. Right off the bat, the Republicans just forced through their voter suppression bill, had hearings the first weekend of the first week of special session, gave very little notice about a public hearing, had people sign up at 7 a.m. for a public hearing on this voter suppression bill, then to only have to wait 12 hours before they had an opportunity to testify on the bill well after midnight, went all night long testifying on the bill, heard overwhelming opposition to the bill. And then at about 7:30 a.m. that morning, voted along party lines to pass the bill, denied all the Democratic amendments to the bill, voted those down. So we walked away from that understanding that there was no bipartisanship going on here, and that really our only recourse was to leave again, and not just to leave to deny quorum, but to move the fight to another front that we could potentially win, and that's here in Washington.
With federal legislation.
That's right.
Right. Where did you all go the first time when you broke quorum the first time?
Well, we only needed to kill about 3 or 4 hours. And so we went to an African American church on the east side of Austin for 2 reasons. One is the Speaker of the House has authority to forcibly bring us back to the floor of the House to create quorum to conduct business and vote out a bill against our will. So they could apprehend us and bring us back. And we thought that we would be safer in a church, that the optics politically would be so bad for the speaker that they perhaps would not drag us out of a church to make us go vote. But
and was that calculation right?
That's right. They didn't come after us. Mm-hmm. And the second reason is because the original bill that we killed, the original version of the bill we killed, had a provision in it that was added really at the 11th hour that had not been debated in either the House or the Senate, that would ban Sunday morning voting, which we know has an impact and would prohibit a longstanding tradition in the African American church of souls to the polls, where people go and vote after church services as a community, and that would no longer be available with the ban on Sunday morning voting. So for that symbolic reason as well, we thought a church, an African American church, was an ideal place to seek refuge.
Because it seems like in making this case and you know, coming to D.C., where you could have gone anywhere, but you came to D.C. because this is where the federal legislation that would sort of rectify, that would stop, that would override these bad state laws that are making it harder for people to vote, these voter suppression laws. But it does seem that in everything you're doing, you're trying to leverage as much as you can of your presence and, you know, where you go to get the message out. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Where a lot of this effort has been also about raising the profile of what Republicans are trying to do. And as people have learned, people have been outraged by this, and people understand the importance of this fight.
This is a very hard question because, you know, some people will say, well, by leaving, you all are contributing to the demise of the process, demise of democracy. But you obviously have concluded differently. Do you feel like you're watching democracy unravel, or do you feel like you're participating in the renewal, that you're helping it be renewed from the grassroots?
I feel like democracy is under attack, and what we're seeing state by state is an effort to do what insurrectionists weren't able to do on January 6th, and that's deny the will of the voters. And so now they're going state by state and systematically trying to pass legislation that limits access to the ballot box for voters, shaving off, you know this, Jen, these elections are won on the margins, right? And if they can shave off some here and shave off some there, then they maintain control. And because those votes they're shaving off are our votes. But so they're essentially denying the voice of the voter, the voice of Americans, and it's an attack on democracy. And so we've decided this is the hill we're going to die on. You know, we've lost all those other fights, but this one, we will do everything in our power to win, because this is our foundational right. Without the right to vote, you don't have any other rights, right? So I think it's motivating and inspiring people, and we know that our people need that kind of inspiration right now to engage, to get other people engaged, to get people to vote, to get people to participate in our democracy, and that makes for a stronger democracy. To have politicians at the Capitol make these decisions for women, make these decisions for families as if they know when they don't, is wrong.
It's not just voting rights that's under assault, right, in Texas. So there's a newly emboldened legislature that's passing really aggressive bills. It's not just making it difficult for people to vote. It's also a 6-week abortion ban, effectively banning critical race theory, allowing most people to carry a handgun without a permit. And they've been emboldened because both chambers and every statewide office belongs to the GOP along with other top offices. What do you feel like is happening here? Is it, that it is, does it feel existential to you in terms of the rights that are being undermined? And is it a coordinated effort from the other side?
It's definitely coordinated. And yes, they've gone after this far right agenda, and they've passed it all essentially on every issue, kind of red meat issue that their primary voters care about. They've gone to the extreme. So it's been a really terrible last 6 months, and many of us are still trying to heal from the damage done in terms of just those fights were so nasty and so hard and so emotional for many of us. But, the way I look at it is... It
takes a toll. I mean, the issues that I just went through, like abortion, how we teach our kids about race, going to the special effort of creating a special session to try to make it harder for people to vote, to suppress the vote. You had a very moving story when you... on the House floor during the hearings with the bill about abortion, banning abortion at 6 weeks. What moved you to do that? How is this all impacting you?
Right. Well, when we took up that 6-week abortion ban bill, I made a decision to tell a personal story that frankly is real common for women and families, but that is often not shared. And it's a story about how probably about 18 years ago now, I was pregnant with our first child, and we learned in the second trimester that she had a condition, a chromosomal abnormality, trisomy 18, that is not compatible with life. And so I had to make a decision about whether to terminate the pregnancy, and I had a week to decide, because after that time I would have had to leave the state to get an abortion because our laws wouldn't have allowed me to have an abortion in Texas as far along as I was. At that time, I made the choice to carry her to term. She died at birth, but I can't tell you that I would have made that same choice, after I had had my first baby and had another child to consider. I mean, these are really tough choices that families just have to deal with, and it's a personal matter, one that we should respect women enough to let their families make for themselves. It's a private, personal matter, and to have politicians at the Capitol make these decisions for women, make these decisions for families as if they know when they don't, is wrong. And so I told my story and called them out on this kind of this sense of kind of moral superiority that they claim when they go after our abortion rights, because no man on that floor has ever gone through what I've gone through. And so it was in some ways a challenge of, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me my story is evil or wrong and my position is wrong. But this is a lived experience I've been through, and it should be honored and respected. And of course I was ignored. And of course the bill was voted along party line. Just like every single right-wing bill that they put before us, permitless carry is another one that passed in Texas. And so now what they're doing is, after passing this right-wing agenda that the majority of Texans don't agree with, they're taking away the ability of Texans to hold them accountable for what they've done by making it harder for Texans to vote.
What I love about the women of the House is that they are the most authentic human beings you will ever meet. And it's refreshing in politics because that's what our youngest people need to see.
We have been joined by Representative Mary González, one of Representative Hinojosa's colleagues, for another perspective. And she is typing in the room with me. She's in the room with me. You said your father's a Republican. Is it sort of like sense of bipartisanship or like coming together in terms of something good for Texas? Do you feel like that's gone, or that's still possible, or how has it changed?
It's a recent history of working with Republicans. Before, when I was a college activist, I would chain myself to buildings. But I do think my desire to work with everybody, and it's not that I want to work with Republicans. I literally want to work with everybody, stems from two places. One, of course, my dad, who is politically, ideologically different from me. And it's so funny because you have Gina on the call, who her dad is like this mega superstar Democrat, and like, how cool is that? But the second part of it is I'm an educator. So think about when I had students who were different than me. I always had to work with all my students to get to a place of a level of understanding. I'm very grateful that I was a professor before I was an elected official, because I take the same tools of trying to plant seeds and create greater consciousness that I did it when I was a professor. Ultimately, as I mentioned before, democracy is very fragile in this moment in time. And one of my favorite books, and if you haven't read it, add it to your book list, How Democracies Die, talks about the strength of needing a healthy political party system. And right now, I want to make sure that we have healthy political parties who are functioning, and that's I feel I play a role in that. So
I want to ask both of you that when I'm watching like the cable networks and seeing the headlines, it feels like it's mostly what I have been seeing is a lot of women, Texas women from the House Democratic Caucus speaking up, and that I've met some men, some of your male colleagues here too, but it does feel like a movement that's powered by a lot of women. Is that true? And can you both tell us about some of these women?
I think this session we had more women in the Democratic caucus than we've ever had. Last session, when we flipped 12 seats, most of those were women, and I believe we picked up more Democratic women than Republican men that year. So women are a growing, strong force in the Texas House. Democratic women, there are only a few Republican women in the House. Again, we have almost half the caucus, and the women do the work. And also, when we broke quorum, it was the women who went first. And the women were kind of held up when we broke quorum the first time. They left the floor first. They got on their phones, started pinging all their friends on the floor saying, get your butt off the floor, come join us. And they had those relationships to be able to move other members. So, again, the women do the work, and we're just a strong and growing force in the Texas House. I would like to hear Mary's perspective because she's been in the House much longer than I have.
I completely agree with Gina. There are more Democratic women. It's still been a transition over time. And what I love not only is that there's women with a variety of backgrounds, so a lot of intersectionality. You see a lot of queer women. You see, not a lot, but 6, which was more than one. The one when I came in, you see a lot of women of color, Black women, brown women. So I think it is a very exciting moment to start to see the diversity that exists in Texas. And one of my favorite quotes, that if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And so now that we are finally getting to be at the table more, we are leading movements. We are front and center. And what I think is critical is how do we institutionalize that in a way that makes us a healthy caucus and a healthy state. And I think that is something we are still working towards. But I'm really grateful that I'm in community with some great women who are leading that conversation.
So this is interesting, though, because Representative Hinojosa said that specifically that, the first time you all did the walkout, that it was women that sort of made the decision or got fed up first. Do you think that, for both of you, do you think that is, are the women more willing to take risk, more tuned into abuse of power, felt like you as a woman had more on the line, but, particularly because of a lot of what they're going after, what the Republicans are going after were, abortion rights, things like that, things where women had a lot at stake?
There are two things that come to mind. One is my experience has been that the Democratic women in the House are very concerned about the collective, less about in their individual agenda and more about the collective success, the success of the whole, right? So we make sacrifices to make that happen. Another interesting thing is a lot of these women have recently been elected to office, and a lot of these women have flipped seats. So they didn't get there kind of through the traditional, like, well, I see that I can easily win this. I have the credentials. The numbers are in my favor. And I mean, I've been elected to office before. This was not like the traditional path. These were women who said, you know what? I have no chance in hell of winning this election because this district's been Republican forever. But I'm not going to stand for this anymore, and I'm going to run. So they're renegades.
Building on that, women have had to navigate our world differently especially those of us who love politics. So getting into these positions, we've had to navigate it very differently. When I go talk to students all the time, they ask me, what are you the most proud of? And I always say, two things. One is very practical. I represent 263 colonias. I'm very proud that I have been able to advocate for clean water and basic infrastructure for colonias because, it's just a disgrace that it's 2021 and there's thousands of Texans that don't have access to water and wastewater infrastructure. But the second thing I'm the most proud of is that is the work I and I think other women have done to maintain and be the most authentic versions of themselves in this space. So this session, I'm Vice Chair of Appropriations. It may have taken me 10 years to be there. Like the person before me would easily got to that position, but it took me 10 years because I didn't change who I was. And it might have taken half a decade longer, but at least that's the way I've navigated power. And so I think
By being your true self.
By being your true self, right? What I love about the women of the House is that they are the most authentic human beings you will ever meet. And it's refreshing in politics because that's what our youngest people need to see. These women will literally, this is their soul. And they're more willing to sacrifice, I think, sometimes, because we've always had to be untraditional. And I don't just think in politics. I see it even in the way Gina is a mother and having to balance all this, or even Aaron Zwiener, or you just see a very different model of leadership, of navigating the world, and I think it's beautiful.
It seems like that you guys are very much in this fight together, and I'm really honored to have the chance to speak with both of you. Good luck. You have a long way to go, but I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks.
It's an honor to talk to you.